Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning and welcome to GB News at just after 10 a.m. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. The Defence Secretary says he fears a Russian attack on Ukraine is highly likely. Speaking to the Sunday Times, Ben Wallace said there's a whiff of Munich in the air, referring to diplomatic efforts which failed to prevent the Second World War. Conservative MP and former United Nations commander in Bosnia, Bob Stewart, told GB News President Putin should think carefully about the consequences of invading.
He is really gambling if he goes into Ukraine. Warfare involves all aspects of society. And if the Russian people actually really suffer because Mr. Putin miscalculates and puts Russian troops into Ukraine, actually, he may well rue that day.
The Labour Party is urging the government to learn lessons from the Afghanistan evacuation to help people leave Ukraine if Russia invades. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy is calling for phone lines to be staffed 24/7 and extra resources put in place to process visas. He's also written to the Foreign Secretary saying the Labour Party stands united with the government over Russian aggression. Britons have been told by the Foreign Office to leave Ukraine immediately as Russia could launch an attack in the coming days. The Prime Minister will leave London this week, insisting he's getting on with the job despite a police investigation into alleged lockdown breaches. Number 10 says he'll start the week in Scotland at a manufacturing site before heading to an oncology centre in northwest England. Boris Johnson says the government is focused on working to unite and level up the country. Lord Frost is among a group of senior Tory MPs and peers urging Boris Johnson to reverse the government's ban on fracking as the UK faces an energy crisis. In a joint letter to the Prime Minister, the former Cabinet Minister and around 29 other Conservatives said it's time to reverse this moratorium. The shale gas mining ban came into effect in 2019 after attempts caused 2 minor earthquakes in Lancashire. Lord Frost says ending it would lead to a British energy renaissance. The Mayor of London says he'll oppose the appointment of a new Metropolitan Police Chief unless they have a robust plan to deal with cultural problems in the force. Writing in The Observer, Sadiq Khan said he was deeply concerned that public trust in the country's biggest police force had been shattered by a series of scandals. Mr Khan said he will work closely with Priti Patel on the selection of Dame Cressida's successor. 7 people have been rescued after a mezzanine floor collapsed last night at a pub in East London. Ambulance crews declared a major incident at the 2 More Years bar in Hackney Wick. Medics treated 13 people, 3 with potentially serious injuries. A man who was in the venue at the time described hearing a cracking noise before the floor collapsed. Fully vaccinated British travellers heading to France no longer have to take a coronavirus test before departure. The travel rules have been eased just in time for the half-term holidays, with many holidaymakers expected to head to French ski resorts. The move comes after the UK significantly eased its own rules for arriving travellers on Friday. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to the political correction.
Good morning, you're watching GB News. On today's political correction, I'm joined by Arlene Foster from Northern Ireland and Paul Embry, who's live with me here in the studio in London, and I'm Michael Portillo. Coming up this hour, Metropolitan Police Commissioner Dame Cressida Dick is stepping down from her role after a series of controversies. We speak to Ian Duncan-Smith about Boris Johnson's plans to form closer economic ties with China. And after Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin talk on the phone, we discuss whether a Russian attack on Ukraine is imminent. We want to hear from you on this morning, so please get involved by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. This is the political correction. Welcome indeed to the political correction. Dame Cressida Dick this week announced that she's going to step down as Metropolitan Police Commissioner. She's thought to have offered her resignation after declining to meet London Mayor Sadiq Khan to discuss plans to reform the Met. Sadiq Khan said that he was not satisfied with her response to calls to change the police force following a series of scandals. And joining us to discuss the resignation is former Scotland Yard detective Peter Blexey. Well, what's the solution, Peter?
Policing in itself is a pretty simplistic thing. If you were to walk down the road and ask the public what they want, I'm convinced they will tell you they want to be safe and they want bad people locked up. That's what they want the police to do. Of course, there are complexities around policing because of the nature of certain investigations and the such like. But essentially, the public are the police's customers. It's the public that should be listened to, not the politicians. And we now need a commissioner who can engage with the rank and file and support them, but also send out a very clear message that if you do something that is unacceptable, then you will be found out and you will be drummed out.
On your very first point about keeping the public safe, I fear that one thing that may be lost in all this is that the Met, I think, has been pretty effective at protecting us from terrorism. And I think in all the charge sheet that's been brought forward against Cressida Dick, we perhaps forget that. You're putting a lot of emphasis on the police's dealings with the public, which I'm sure are important. But it's interesting to me that there was some difference, was there not, between the remarks that Sadiq Khan was making about Cressida Dick's departure and those made by Priti Patel, the Home Secretary. That is to say, what he was talking about was the culture of misogyny and homophobia, all of which is extremely unpleasant. But the Home Secretary went to the point about knife crime and safety on the streets and protecting the public. Which of the two was closer to the point, do you think?
Well, firstly, I must touch on the terrorism point, and you are right, the police and the security services have done some sterling work in thwarting various plots, not all of them, sadly, but many. But the resources that have been deployed to counter-terrorism work has come at a price. And essentially, it's neighbourhood policing within the Met that has been sacrificed in order to plough additional resources into counter-terrorism work. Secondly, yes, we get mixed messages between the Home Office and the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. We have a Labour Mayor. We have a Tory Home Secretary. So it's not surprising, perhaps, that they will choose to feature on different aspects of policing and crime. But both of them have been misleading the public. And sadly today, Sadiq Khan has repeated the mistakes of Priti Patel and others that they've committed only recently, and that is in saying that crime is down. This is selective quotations. This is not the whole unvarnished truth, because once we factor in fraud, which is utterly rampant, and online crime, crime is very much indeed going up.
Peter, we often hear the phrase "bobbies on the beat." We need more bobbies on the beat. And it seems to me, I mean, is it a cliche? Because I have to say, in my experience, it seems to me that the police have largely withdrawn from the streets. I mean, I cannot remember the last time I saw a police officer just patrolling on foot along the streets. And it seems to me that that actually is an integral part of policing, that type of intelligence-led policing. So, I mean, is that true? Do police officers recognise that they have withdrawn from the streets, or is that a cliche? Because it certainly seems to be true from where I think many members of the public are sitting.
Yes, you are highly unlikely today to see a police officer patrolling at some leisurely stroll down the road with their hands clasped behind their back, nodding and saying good morning and listening to people, going into people's houses and coming back to the station at the end of their shift, awash with tea and awash with information. Sadly, that is a bygone thing that used to happen in my day. Police officers now are invariably in vehicles with an astonishingly high workload, going from 999 call to yet another 999 call. And the vast majority of them do that work selflessly and quite brilliantly. But yes, people want to see a cop on their streets. People want to see a police and crime police support officer walking down their streets so they can offer them a cup of tea and a biscuit. But sadly, that's all gone for the time being.
Let's bring in Arlene, because Peter, you've been saying that we should separate politics from policing. But I suspect one place that knows a bit about this is Northern Ireland. Arlene, how have you reacted to that thought that you separate politics from policing?
Well, first of all, let me agree with Paul. My late father was a police constable and used to do the beat in our local town. Used to walk about with his hands behind the back, behind his back, talking to everybody and engaging with the community, and therefore letting them see the face of policing. I really yearn for those days again. But I was interested, Peter, it brought back, when you talked about politics and policing, it brought me back to a statement, an article actually, which the Greater Manchester Chief Constable Stephen Watson gave last year, when he said that the public are fed up with virtue signalling, and what they want is actually the police to do their job. And I think that's what you are talking about. And really there was this great difference in emphasis, I'm going to put it like that, between what Sadiq Khan had to say about a culture. They needed to tackle the culture in the Met, and he's written again today about that. Whereas the Home Secretary is talking about dealing with knife crime, getting weapons off our streets, making people feel safe again. And surely that's the job of the police, instead of trying to deal with all the ills of society.
Well, Mr Watson presides over Greater Manchester Police, which is a service itself in special measures. So the failings of police, sadly, go the length and breadth of the nation. And it's not just the Met that has a lot to do. But in terms of separating the policing from the politics, whosoever the next commissioner may be, when they are appointed, I feel has to send out a very clear message to the Home Secretary and say, you may appoint me, but you are not my puppet master. I serve the public. I listen to the public. Me and my staff work for the public, not the politicians. And if the incoming commissioner can send out that powerful message, it will chime with their officers and the public, and we might take a huge step forward.
Although Sadiq Khan didn't mention it, I suspect that politics was partly her downfall. I mean, the decision that was made by the Met to investigate the Partygate and therefore to block the Sue Gray report from coming out in its entirety, seemed to me like a disastrously clumsy intervention in a field which was obviously political. Maybe, Paul, you have a view on that. Did you feel that there was a better way of averting that disaster for the police?
I think there was a serious misstep. I think there's been a number of missteps. That was the latest one, of course. But I think, Michael, and I'd be interested in Peter's views, I think these issues are much broader than who happens to be in charge of the Met at any particular time. It seems to me the old metaphor of changing the deck chairs on the Titanic. If the whole institution is going in the wrong direction, which I have to say I think the police as an institution is, then I'm not sure it makes much of a difference who's at the top. I mean, it seems to me that there isn't an institution in Britain whose own ethos is more at divergence with ordinary members of the public than the police. I think members of the public want the police to be talking about, preventing crime, tackling burglaries, all of this sort of stuff, tackling antisocial behaviour, that kind of thing, tackling the drug dealer on the corner of their street where I mean, if you go on social media, for example, and look at the various police accounts, they're far more likely to be talking about their commitment to LGBT rights. Now, I'm not saying that stuff isn't important, but in terms of prioritising things and trying to make sure your priorities chime with those of the public, it seems to me that the police have just got that completely wrong.
And can I challenge you here, Peter? Because I think the solution you suggest is that the commissioner needs to be someone in touch with the police on the ground, needs to have much more contact with officers actually doing their job. But unfortunately, this Charing Cross police station business has revealed that some of the attitudes down on the ground are very unsatisfactory from the point of view of dealing with the public. You can't have misogyny in a police force which is dealing with 50% women. So are you really right in saying the solution is to be more in touch with the officers down in the stations?
A number of things to deal with there,
yes,
if I may, gentlemen. First of all, Partygate. Now, one of Cressida Dick's major failures of judgment towards the end of her tenure was when those allegations came to light. And let's remember, those allegations were made by credible news outlets, the Mirror newspaper and ITV News. At that point, when those criminal allegations were made, Cressida Dick should have said, "They're crimes, we're going to investigate them." She didn't. She did the exact opposite. And then, of course, well, somebody had to investigate them, so Sue Gray came into being. If Cressida Dick had made the right decision in the first place, the Sue Gray investigation, in all likelihood, wouldn't even have happened, and we wouldn't be in this entirely unsatisfactory halfway house that we find ourselves in at the moment. Another point, with regards to the police reaching out to various community groups and various interest groups and various different sections of society. The police need to be there for everyone. As Commissioner, I would not allow any officer of any rank to wear any symbol displaying allegiance or support for any organisation. Only by wearing nothing on their uniform, apart from what they are officially issued with, do they show that they are there for everyone. And the police needs to be there for everyone. And finally, if I may, about being in touch with the rank and file on the front line. That is vitally important. But because, of course, police officers know what's right and wrong, okay? They should also know the law. So they need to be encouraged to step forward when there is wrongdoing, to challenge it at each and every opportunity. And they need to know that their ultimate boss, the Commissioner, is there for them when they do that.
Peter, I'm smiling because you demonstrate the difference between a policeman and a politician, because you were given 3 questions and you were determined to answer all of them. Arlene, do you have any expectation at all that if there's a change at the top in the Met, that the Met will change?
Well, look, leadership's important, and I do agree with Paul that obviously it has to go right down to the bottom, but leadership's important, and I think it is important that the next commissioner shows the sort of leadership that's there. I mean, I have to say, I think Cressida Dick has been a very unlucky commissioner because she's dealing with things that didn't happen under her tenure, but then, of course, she's dealing with things that did happen under her tenure as well, so she has to come forward with that. I was interviewing former Chief Superintendent Parm Sandhu on my programme on Friday, and she had the attitude that Cressida Dick has had enough time to deal with all of these issues and therefore should have came forward with an action plan that satisfied the Mayor, because I had been saying to her that was she being treated unfairly, because of course the Federation and the police officers in the Met themselves quite liked Cressida Dick because she stood up for the police officers when they were challenged. So it's a question of, and we'll talk about this a bit later, about an institution being defensive when they're challenged. You need a leader that is actually open to taking challenge, but if they're confident enough in their organisation, they can take that challenge and be accountable for things that have happened in their organisation. So what the Met needs now is an officer that feels confident that everything that is going on in the Met, that he or she can be accountable for. And it's going to be a very, very difficult job. I've heard Peter talk about taking politics out of policing, and we've heard that many, many times. But of course, policing has to operate in the context of the political situation that it finds itself in. And that's why we've seen a lot of focus on some of the cultural issues that we've talked about, whether it's misogyny, whether it's sexism, racism, or homophobia as well.
2 quick questions because we're running out of time. Paul, you have a feeling that she was the wrong appointment to begin with, Cressida Dick. Peter, I'd be interested to know what you think about a candidate who's supposedly favoured by Priti Patel, who's called Lynn Owens, I think. Paul?
Yeah, I felt it was a political appointment. I felt that Cressida Dick ticked the right boxes in terms of the ideology, the ethos that the police and government were pursuing at the time. I mean, let's not forget she was instrumental in the police's response to the John Charles de Menezes incident, where that person was killed on the London Underground. I suspect that if that were any other police officer, a male police officer, for example, that would have been the end of any hopes of promotion for that particular officer. So I think Cressida Dick was appointed for a particular reason. It was political, and I suspect very strongly that the next appointment's going to be political as well.
Well, without leading you on that point, Lynn Owens has been mentioned.
Yes, she has. Former head of the National Crime Agency, who stepped down from that role not so long ago. The NCA operates very differently from policing because it's not patrolling the streets, it's not answering 999 calls. And she does, of course, come from a policing background, however. But I've had recent dealings with the NCA and the police, and I'd just like to pick up on what Arlene said. They are defensive. And this, unfortunately, is their default position of so many law enforcement bodies. They need to shed that. They need to realise that actually most of the public are still on their side and want them to do well. And we can keep the politics out, because if the public are happy, because the police are doing their job well, then the politicians will benefit from that anyway. So would they kindly keep their noses out of it?
Well, are you on the side of the Metropolitan Police? Let's hear your views. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Coming up after the break, we'll be discussing the origins of COVID-19 with renowned scientist Matt Ridley. So don't go away, please.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. Well, your GB views have been coming in. Marion says, Sadiq Khan will not approve any head of the Met unless they're sympathetic to his causes.
And Robert says Khan should have nothing to do with the appointment of the new commissioner. He is only a mayor. Commissioners report to the Home Secretary. I think ultimately the decision rests with the Home Secretary, but she has to have regard for the views of the mayor, I think.
It is the most curious situation where we have these two people involved. So, it's not very clear where responsibility lies. Pauline says, Let us have police stations back in our local communities. That's rather echoing one of the discussion points. Last one from you, Paul.
Yeah, and Dave says, I can't see the sense where a political mayor of opposite views to the government, the point that we were just making, who should be paying the police commissioners, is effectively sacking the mayor by criticism and threats.
So, a change of subject. President Joe Biden has spoken to his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, over the phone in a bid diplomatically to resolve the escalating situation on the Ukrainian border. It comes amid reports of Putin bolstering his troops on the border, with many onlookers fearing that a Russian attack could be imminent. Both the United States and the United Kingdom governments have advised their citizens to leave Ukraine. Arlene, I mean, I don't know what value there is really in you and the two of us giving our opinions as to whether this is likely to happen. But let's just start there. Are you feeling more fearful this week? We're being told that it might happen as soon as Wednesday.
Yeah, I noticed that people are now starting to predict the day of the invasion, which is quite worrying, I have to say, because up until now we were talking about if it's going to take place, and now people are actually talking about when it's going to take place. I mean, I've been struck actually by the fact that Putin has been trying to divide NATO and to get different messages from the different leaders in NATO. And I think, unfortunately, he has succeeded in that because instead of having one single voice from NATO, we appear to be having a number of people going to Russia to see Putin. And he will pick up on any difference, however small, in the discussions that he's having with Macron or with the Prime Minister, our own Prime Minister, or indeed anybody from NATO that goes to Russia. And I think that's wrong. I think NATO should have been sending a single representative to speak to the Russian authorities instead of having a succession of people going to speak to him. Because what he wants to do, of course, is to portray NATO as the bad guy in all of this. We know that NATO is a defensive organization. However, he's trying to portray them as something different. And we've heard about this. I always think it's amusing when we enter into a discussion on these things. There are always these new terminology. So the new terminology is a false flag. So a false flag is that Putin is hoping that people in NATO will give him the opportunity to blame them if there is an invasion coming. So I think that's what we have to be aware of, the sort of politics that's going on behind the scenes. But I have to say, it is worrying when we're now starting to talk about when, not if.
The differences that have been expressed by different leaders of NATO countries that you've alluded to have not been trivial. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, has waded into the debate today, talking about a whiff of Munich being in the air. This is a reference, of course, to the Munich Agreement of 1938, preceding the Second World War. And I wondered, Paul, whether this whiff of Munich was a reference to you. What do you think?
Very possibly, Michael. I just think it's complete hyperbole in that respect. I mean, it seems to me that every single conflict the UK finds itself involved in, or potential conflict, at some point, either the media or the government will roll out the scenario of Munich. We saw it over Iraq. We saw it actually over Suez as far back as that. We've seen it over Syria. We're now seeing it over Ukraine, where people just try to draw parallels and say, look, if we don't act, then we're going to find a situation that we were in 1938, where we appease this kind of fascist regime. And I just don't actually think it's a sensible way to go around having the debate by inflaming things in that way. I mean, I have to say, I think there are going to be look, I don't know if an invasion is imminent. I think Putin would be a bit stupid, frankly, to invade Ukraine. But it seems to me, with the level of certainty that people are suggesting that it's going to happen, there's going to be a few people left with egg on their faces if it didn't happen. I mean, this idea that, as Arlene said, we can even predict the day that it's going to happen, I think is a little bit over the top. And it seems to me, actually, when you read the reports of what Ukrainians themselves are saying, including government figures in Ukraine, they seem quite nonplussed by the whole thing. So when you have Western politicians saying, look, we've seen evidence suggesting that an invasion's imminent, and you hear senior government figures in Ukraine saying, would you mind sharing that evidence with us because we're not aware of it, you have to wonder whether or not what's being reported is accurate, frankly.
I'm going to move subject in just a second, but I am just going to respond to what Paul said, because I do think there are parallels with Munich, actually. I mean, for example, we talk about whether there's going to be an invasion of Ukraine. There have been two already. Two chunks of Ukraine have already been seized by Russia. We do need to remember that this is the same Russia that invaded Hungary in 1956 and Czechoslovakia in 1968. These people do have form. One of the things that was said in 1938 was that there were no further aspirations in Europe that Hitler had. It's pretty clear that Putin does have further aspirations in Europe. Now, I'm not saying we should go to war over it, which was the choice in 1938, but that this person at some point needs to be resisted, I think, is without doubt.
I think the huge flaw in your argument is the suggestion that this is still the Russia that went into Hungary in 1956, for example. I think actually Russia today is, undoubtedly it's a corrupt country and Putin is a despot, there's no doubt about that. But the idea that today's Russia is A, politically aligned with the Soviet Union, I think is wrong, and B, has anything like the power of the Soviet Union, I think is simply wrong. I think today's Russia is a very different kind of country. And we have to look at, frankly, America's record. When America talks about countries being sovereign and Russia not interfering with countries on its border, America has been doing that since the Second World War. America has intervened in Latin America, for example, time and time again when a Latin American country decides to elect a government that doesn't work to America's interests or that America doesn't like. So there's a stench of hypocrisy in this debate, and that needs to be exposed, and it isn't being exposed in the media, unfortunately. And making that point does not make you a supporter of Putin, let me stress that.
I'm itching to respond further, but I did promise that we would move on. And first of all, Arlene, have you got some more GB views for us?
Yes, sorry, Michael. I was laughing at their interaction between the two of you there in relation to all of that. But if we are moving on, just to read on some GB views then that have come in, Max says, and this goes back to the story that we opened up with this morning, that it's more than obvious that Sadiq Khan is the main problem here, being a Labour man. He will do anything to show that a Conservative appointed police commissioner is not doing a good job. Rachel then says that, she's saying that some of the sources that you quoted are not credible and they are biased. And Stuart says that the attitude of police officers comes directly from their leadership. If their leadership is going to be more interested in politics than policing, then of course the standard of policing is going to suffer. Those are some of the views that are coming in from our viewers. Please keep sending them in and we'll keep relating them to everybody else.
Yes, thank you, Arlene. Please keep those views coming. When COVID-19 rapidly spread around the world in the early part of 2020, it left us all wondering, what is this virus and where did it come from? Theories and studies linking bats, soil, and leaks from Chinese laboratories have been circulating since the pandemic began. But where did the virus really come from? And who or what is really behind it? Joining us now to discuss this is renowned scientist and co-author of Viral, the search for the origin of COVID-19, Matt Ridley. Welcome to the programme, Matt. So what is the answer? Where did it come from?
We don't know. We still don't know. And it's shocking that we don't know. We're 2 years into this pandemic, more than 2 years. And in the case of SARS, we knew within a few months that the people catching it were food handlers, that civet cats in markets were infected with a 99% cousin, and that was the route by which it was being caught. In the case of MERS, Nipah, all these other emerging viruses, it was pretty quick. 2 years in, with much superior technology, we still don't know. And the reason we don't know is because we're not allowed to investigate properly. We had a World Health Organization investigation that held a press conference a year ago this week, which was a farce and basically endorsed a farcical Chinese theory that it had reached Wuhan on frozen food. The things we do know, Michael, are that it's a bat virus originally, no question about that. Horseshoe bats carry SARS-like viruses, that's for certain. And that it broke out in Wuhan, 1,000 miles away from where these bats carrying these viruses are generally found. So the central question we have to ask is how it got from one to the other. And the two leading hypotheses are that somebody smuggled some wildlife to a market in Wuhan and people got infected that way, which is what happened in the case of SARS, or that the scientists who were collecting large numbers of viruses, over 100 SARS-like viruses of different kinds, and taking them to Wuhan, which was the leading center for studying SARS-like viruses in the world, slipped up somewhere and there was an accidental release.
Matt, you're telling me that you've written a book, and the answer to the question is we don't know.
Yes, but it's a fascinating, gripping detective story along the way. And we fully expected, my co-author and I, Alina Chan, that while we were writing the book, the answer would emerge. We're even more intrigued to have got to the end of writing a book and published it, and it's going to come out in paperback this year and all that kind of thing. And we're updating it now, but we still don't know the answer. And there's a big vested interest in the Chinese establishment, but also to some extent in the scientific establishment, in having the waters close over this story and say, well, the trail's gone cold, we may never know, and so on. Well, that's worrying, because the two leading hypotheses, that it was the market or that it was the lab, both lead to necessary actions. You know, we need to have regulations on labs to stop doing gain-of-function experiments that are highly risky, and we need to have regulations on the wildlife trade to stop people trading in animals that can pick up these viruses. We're doing neither, frankly. There's not much cracking down on either of those routes, and that means we're a sitting duck for the next pandemic.
Arlene, you have interviewed Matt before. Are you frustrated that we still don't know the answer, even after his new book?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the book sets out a very clear trajectory, Matt, if you don't mind me saying so, towards the lab. But, I mean, I'm interested because when we spoke before, you had indicated that America and indeed ourselves should be pushing in relation to this issue, because when Australia said to China, well, actually, we believe it came from you guys, and we think that you're to blame, they face sanctions as a result of that. How do we get to the answer, given that it is China? And we're going to discuss China later on, actually, in relation to trade. But how do we get in behind that to find out the answer?
Yeah, well, you know, when I raised this question a number of times in Parliament in 2020 and early 2021, I was always told, let's leave it to the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization took an awful long time to negotiate terms for visiting Wuhan. When they did so, they basically went on a tourist tour. They went to a museum. They went to the wrong lab of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, etc. And then they held this press conference where they endorsed the Chinese theories. So, frankly, the fact that the World Health Organization was doing a poor job prevented the rest of the world calling for an independent investigation. And I think we need some kind of bipartisan COVID commission, COVID origin commission in the United States or, you know, sort of transatlantic, you know, because there's a lot of UK expertise that we could call on here, and with countries like Australia and others involved, leading, frankly, to a pandemic treaty where we all agree to be much more open with what we're doing in labs, what information we will share if there's an event, and so on. If we have such a treaty, sure, China might not sign it, but it would put pressure on them eventually to do so. I mean, just an interesting parallel here. In 2007, there was an outbreak of foot and mouth disease near Pirbright in Surrey. Pirbright is the site of the world's leading reference laboratory on foot and mouth disease. That turned out not to be a coincidence, but Britain didn't say, well, none of you are allowed to know what went on here. We're not going to tell you if we find that there was a contractor mending a broken pipe at the lab who then went to a farm nearby, which is what we did tell the world. China has the world's leading SARS-like coronavirus laboratory. It's in Wuhan. An outbreak has occurred within 10 miles of that lab. They ought to be behaving like we did over that foot and mouth disease and say, here's all the information we know. Let's let the media know about it. Let's let the scientific establishment know about it. That's what we're lacking.
Matt, you speak up for transparency, which is a great theme. And I've teased you a tiny bit this morning, but I just want to congratulate you on the great investigative work that you have done. Thank you for being with us today as well. Coming up after the break, we're asking whether the UK government pursuing closer economic ties with China is the right course of action. Please stay with us.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction on GB News. The Prime Minister has ordered the government to organise talks with Chinese officials for the first time since 2018 in a bid to achieve closer trade ties with the nation. The move has sparked a backlash from a group of Tory MPs who are concerned about the potential security risks of closer links with China. The move is said to be politically dangerous for Boris Johnson, who is already facing a possible challenge to his leadership after a recent plethora of scandals. Joining us now is the Member of Parliament and former Conservative Party leader, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith. Ian, how marvellous to see you. Shall we just start? Good morning. Shall we just start with the charge sheet against China, because I've seen you expressing it rather clearly in your latest démarche on this subject.
Well, I've been concerned about China for some considerable time, and the fact that the West, the free world, has rushed to China for cheaper goods over the years has made China into an even more powerful threat than I think it might otherwise have been. The arrival of President Xi has shifted the balance dramatically in the way that China behaves to the outside world, and the list is just growing and phenomenal. You know, the country that has literally occupied the South China Seas, even though the UN has said they had no rights to it. They're now threatening Taiwan on a regular basis with military action. But worse than that, internally, you know, they are, I believe, absolutely guilty of genocide in Xinjiang. I mean, Sir Geoffrey Nice's tribunal, which is a serious tribunal, has come to the balance of judgment that it is likely that genocide is being committed. They've been committing a form of that in Tibet for some considerable time. We have very strong evidence from Chinese documents about the slave labor elements that are used. So many products that the UK and others now use actually use slave labor in their production. All the cotton, I think about 40% of the world's cotton, is produced out of Xinjiang, and a huge amount of that is involved in forced labor. So all of these areas, you know, the imposition of the crackdown on the Christians and the Falun Gong, and then the serious problems in Hong Kong after they trashed the Sino-British Agreement and now arresting what were peaceful democracy campaigners. I mean, China is a very powerful nation now, and very financially powerful too. And I think the real problem we've got is that the government is conflicted over this. And you've just been talking to Matt Ridley, and I was fascinated to listen to that interview. The reality is, even if we can't show that China did something in a laboratory or whatever, the real problem comes from how China behaved after it was obvious that there was human-to-human transfer back in December, almost certainly. First of all, it locked up and seriously trashed the reputation of scientists inside China who brought this to the attention of the world. And then it proceeded to block any further investigations. It wasn't until late January that they admitted to the WHO that they had a problem, by which time it had spread around the world. So millions have died because the world, the WHO and others, were not prepared to face up to China and demand that China behaved in a proper and reasonable way. And there are plenty more in this charge sheet, but I think that's enough to be going on with.
Yes, that's the charge sheet, but I think quite a lot of people would say, well, all right, there are lots of countries that behave very badly. Why should this impact on British jobs and British companies? Why should we try to stop Liz Truss approaching China for trade deals?
Well, I think the evidence of really what's happened since we've made ourselves so dependent on China then explains how the world, the Western world, the free world, then behaves. We have not called out China seriously on any of these issues at all. And instead of which, we've rushed to China for all sorts of production of goods. The result is we've now become not just wholly dependent, but I believe wholly dependent on a malign organization. So, for example, after a large campaign we mounted in 2019, 2020, cross-party, by the way, we managed to block the government giving Huawei the 5G contract. It turns out that the security services were quite clear about the fact that Huawei poses a direct threat to our security. We've got them locked into our nuclear industry now, and there's a very strong belief that they pose a direct threat to that. UK universities are literally beholden to China for money to a degree that really affects how their science projects go. And we've found lots of Chinese postgrad students involved in often defense contracts over here, then heading back to China. China has a very clear view under President Xi about how the world should look, and it absolutely dismisses the idea of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. They believe their system of government is the only system of government that works, and they are promoting it around the world into the developing world, where they give these huge loans, which become very serious debts hanging around the necks of many of these countries. I mean, you know, they make you, if you take a loan, buy their goods. They then send people to implement them. So, you know, it's a huge problem with China, and it's no good rushing back to them to ask and beg for more. We've seen what happens when you become dependent. During the COVID outbreak, why did we struggle to get any of the things that we needed, respirators, PPE equipment? Because it was all made in China. And China, of course, was looking after itself first. So there's a big question about this idea that we don't retain any strategic production or anything here in the Western world. And I think these are big questions to be asked. There's no question that China poses and wants to pose that direct threat to undermine us.
It's very clearly spoken. I believe you're in a hurry to get to a football match. So we'll let you go. And that gives me a segue into this next story, which is that a very shocking video was released this week showing West Ham footballer caught Zuma kicking and slapping his cat. The footage understandably went viral, leading to international outrage and demands that the footballer be prosecuted for animal abuse and kicked out of the West Ham squad. The footballer issued a public apology, and the club condemned Zuma's actions, fined him £250,000. Reports say he could face up to 4 years in jail in his native France. Well, our sports commentator Aidan McGee joins us. Do you think that West Ham is right to go on playing him?
I do actually, Michael, because I think that we have to believe that the player can be rehabilitated, and we have to believe that he can be reintegrated into football, into society almost, as it were, if we're going to broaden it out rather than have his life completely ruined. We've seen some people suggest on social media that, you know, he should be banged up in prison for a period of time, he should be kicked out of football. Now, we always criticise our big companies in this country and elsewhere, and I think you'd have to term a Premier League football club in that category now. You'd have to place them in that area. And they've refused to bow to the Twitter mob, and they've put the player back into action against Watford on Wednesday. No matter when you put him in, Michael, you're going to get a backlash. In fact, he's going to get a backlash now for the rest of his career. That's the reality for Kurt Zouma. He played against Watford. They put him out in the firing line. I think the easiest thing to do in some ways would have been to remove him from the firing line, and in the hope that it would die down. I think West Ham actually hoped, and I know Premier League clubs quite well, having worked with them closely for 20 years, I think they hoped that the whole thing would die down if they just put him out there now on Wednesday to get out of the way, and that the story would perhaps dissipate the closer we got to the weekend. Now, the backlash in the social media era dictates that that was never going to happen. In fact, it's got even worse. We're still talking about it at the weekend, although David Moyes has been defiant in his press conference on Friday that the player was going to play against Leicester City today. They're in an exalted position in the league. They're going for a top 4 place, Champions League, the first time that could happen in West Ham United's history. A long way to go, though, it has to be said. But for now, Kurt Zouma's in the side today. I think he's going to play. I think he's going to start the game, and I think he'll start for the rest of the season.
Paul, should he play?
I think I disagree with Aidan in terms of whether or not he should have played the game against Watford. I think it was a miscalculation by West Ham to throw him into that game. I think we are such a nation of animal lovers that whenever anybody is seen to be doing something that's cruel to an animal, then they will inevitably and rightly get a lot of flack for it. So I think he was always going to face a lot of criticism, both from the fans. I mean, I understand he actually went down injured on the pitch during the game, and all the fans started chanting, "Now you know how your cat feels." So, you know, he was always going to get that level of stick, and I felt that from a tactical point of view, it would have been better for West Ham to say, look, he's in the public eye at the moment. He's clearly done something wrong. Let's just take him away from the spotlight. Let's let him, you know, disappear for a couple of games, and then we'll bring him back in. But you know, the bottom line is what he did was pretty cruel. I saw the video, and it was very nasty stuff. And clearly, he needs to be reprimanded for it in a serious way.
I think that goes without saying, but I'm very worried about double or even triple jeopardy. That is to say, if you commit something which is potentially a criminal offence, you should be prosecuted for it. You should have your day in court. You should pay the penalty. But if you're also going to have your career ruined, and possibly have your career ruined even before you've had your day in court, this seems to me absolutely wrong. And I do believe now that many people stand in jeopardy of being tried by the media, tried by the Twitterati, and losing their careers. And even if they're guilty, I don't think the sentence should necessarily be that you lose your career. Arlene Foster, do you have maybe a quick reaction to that, and maybe some GB views as well, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I take your point about double jeopardy, Michael, but unfortunately there is double jeopardy for some people, because if you commit an offence that is directly linked to the operation of your career or your profession, then of course you do lose your job. I'm thinking about police officers, for example, who are found guilty of drink driving offences, you know, and things like that. So there is an element of double jeopardy, but I tend to agree with you that he should be prosecuted through the proper channels, and then, of course, West Ham should deal with it in whatever way they see fit. It has been a very unseemly, I have to say, episode, however, and when you see social media and you understand how much young people are influenced by social media, you know, what does that say? People who look up to him as a professional footballer, and I think that's probably the concerning piece. In terms of GB views, we've had a number of views in relation to the policing story. Again, June says that she agrees with everything Paul says and would go one step further. It will be political when the next commissioner is appointed, because Sadiq Khan will oppose anyone who does not hold his political views. Philip says, so many police stations have been closed down across the country. I used to live in Epsom. Police station closed down, Nix Village, South Asted. A police station closed down, Nix Town, South Leatherhead. Police station closed down, happening all across the UK. And that goes back to this neighbourhood policing element, which of course is very concerning for a lot of people, that a number of their local police stations have been closed down. So that's the GB views coming in on that issue, Michael.
Thank you, Arlene. Britain is experiencing a serious crisis with the cost of living. With disruptions caused by the pandemic, companies are said to be laying off staff and cutting wages, and the Bank of England has warned the nation to prepare for a reduction in living standards and sharp rises in inflation. What impact is the crisis going to have on families across the nation, and what could we expect in coming months? To discuss this, we're joined in the studio by Dawn Maria France. She's Editor-in-Chief of Yorkshire Women's Life. There's some implication, even in inviting you here today, that things might be different for women and that things might be different in the north. Is that likely to be so, do you think?
Well, what's really striking is North Yorkshire, which is seen as quite affluent, and it's the natural place for Conservative support. But the CAB in North Yorkshire has said they've seen a rise in phone calls from people who live in North Yorkshire, particularly when the £20 uplift disappeared. That caused people to suffer over £1,000 loss from their household budgets. And also in North Yorkshire, we've seen a lot of food banks moving into areas which largely went to working class areas. And the crisis is continuing. We're looking at the national insurance rise in April. We're looking at various bills going up. It's a real crisis. It's happening to a lot of people who would normally not actually have that experience. But the government announced an emergency measure in the form of a repayment of £200 as a discount for energy bills. But the CAB said that's not enough. We're seeing a rise in food banks as well. Although Labour has said VAT on energy bills should be scrapped to help support people, the people that I talk to don't think that's enough. They want to hear Labour have more voice and say more about the crisis and how it's going to support them. And this feels like a time for Labour to show that they're supporting working class families and families that are struggling. And also what was interesting was a survey by Zoopla showed that rent in Yorkshire is going to go up by £50 a month. So you've got people struggling already, and with wages not really increasing as such, it feels like outside the M25, there's not the political mindset to speak about what's happening to people in the north, and people need to hear that voice.
Paul, I suspect some people inside the M25 would say, but wait a minute, the cost of living is a good deal cheaper in Yorkshire than it is inside the M25. And they might also say these discounts, which have been promised by the government for the lower bands of council tax, will disproportionately help places outside the M25. Would I be wrong to be hearing those comments?
I mean, technically that may be true, but I think the danger is that we create an artificial divide in some respects. I mean, there's no question that I think in many respects people in if you like, the more provincial parts of our country have it harder in terms of the financial difficulties that they face. But across the board, I mean, the squeeze on pay is the worst for 200 years at the moment. Real wages are falling for ordinary working class people. People are being hit hard by increased energy bills, national insurance, as Dawn said. And as a society, we need to find a way to get out of that. And my fear is that if we just slow wage growth in this way, we're going to hinder the economic recovery and make things worse.
And Arlie, Northern Ireland is an area where living standards are not as high as they are in the southeast of England. Do you think you'll be disproportionately hit over there?
I do, and of course, and I know we're going to talk about this later on, we have the difficulties with the protocol, which of course is increasing costs of goods in terms of consumer goods as well to deal with. But I thought it was interesting, Dawn mentioned there the fact that North Yorkshire is seen to be quite an affluent area, but that there are pockets of deprivation, and that's something that happens, I think, right across the UK. People think that Cheshire and places like this are very, very affluent, very well-to-do, there's no problem there. But that's the place where you will find pockets of deprivation and people living in poverty, actually, and those are the people that need our help, and it's how we help those people. And it's through community help. And of course, community help is there when people come together and work together for the good of their community. And that's been really hit by COVID, Michael, because people aren't coming together in the same way as they were before COVID. And therefore, I think we do have a problem, and we're going to talk about it later on in the programme. But how do we solve that big society problem, if I can use the David Cameron word, of people coming together to help their neighbours in a time of need?
And Dawn Maria, in the briefest way, is there any way in which women are going to feel the brunt of this particularly, do you think?
Yes, because a lot of jobs in hospitality were mainly aimed at women, and we've seen hospitality take a hit, really. But I'd also like to say that I think the Department of Work and Pension, by taking away the £20 uplift, which was hitting largely women, is quite alarming. And from what I can see, maybe there needs to be a change at the top of the DWP so that they can see that they really need to look after everyone in general, and particularly the red walled seats too.
Dawn Maria, thank you very much indeed. Coming up in the next hour, Jacob Rees-Mogg becomes the Minister for Brexit Opportunities. What does this mean for Britain's future outside the European Union? Sir John Major weighs in on the Partygate developments. And the Canadian truck saga. We speak to Canadian journalist John Iveson. Much more too. Don't go away, please.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching GB News. Coming up in this hour in the political correction, we discuss the Prime Minister's mini reshuffle, which saw Jacob Rees-Mogg move from his position as Leader of the House of Commons. A state of emergency has been declared in Ontario in response to 2 weeks of COVID protests. And do you agree with John Major? Has trust in politics been eroded by foolish behaviour? That plus plenty more just after the news.
Good morning, it's 1 minute past 11. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Defence Secretary says he fears a Russian attack on Ukraine is highly likely. Speaking to the Sunday Times, Ben Wallace said there's a whiff of Munich in the air, referring to diplomatic efforts which failed to prevent the Second World War. Conservative MP and former United Nations commander in Bosnia, Bob Stewart, told GB News President Putin should think carefully about the consequences of invading.
He is really gambling if he goes into Ukraine. Warfare involves all aspects of society. And if the Russian people actually really suffer because Mr. Putin miscalculates and puts Russian troops into Ukraine, actually, he may well rue that day.
Bob Stewart. The Labour Party is urging the government to learn lessons from the Afghanistan evacuation to help people leave Ukraine if Russia invades. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy is calling for phone lines to be staffed 24/7 and extra resources put in place to process visas. He's also written to the Foreign Secretary saying the Labour Party stands united with the government over Russian aggression. Britons have been told by the Foreign Office to leave Ukraine immediately as Russia could launch an attack in the coming days. The Prime Minister will leave London this week, insisting he's getting on with the job despite a police investigation into alleged lockdown breaches. Number 10 says he'll start the week in Scotland at a manufacturing site before heading to an oncology centre in north-west England. Boris Johnson says the government is focused on working to unite and level up the country. Lord Frost is among a group of senior Tory MPs and peers urging Boris Johnson to reverse the government's ban on fracking as the UK faces an energy crisis. In a joint letter to the Prime Minister, the former Cabinet Minister and around 29 other Conservatives said it's time to reverse this moratorium. The shale gas mining ban came into effect in 2019 after attempts caused 2 minor earthquakes in Lancashire. Lord Frost says ending it would lead to a British energy renaissance. The Mayor of London says he'll oppose the appointment of a new Metropolitan Police Chief unless they have a robust plan to deal with cultural problems in the force. Writing in The Observer, Sadiq Khan said he was deeply concerned that public trust in the Met had been shattered by a series of scandals. Mr Khan said he will work closely with Priti Patel on the selection of Dame Cressida's successor. 7 people have been rescued after a mezzanine floor collapsed last night at a pub in East London. Ambulance crews declared a major incident at the 2 More Years bar in Hackney Wick. Medics treated 13 people, 3 with potentially serious injuries. A man who was in the venue at the time described hearing a cracking noise before the floor collapsed. The International Atomic Energy Agency is reviewing plans to release 1 million tonnes of water from Japan's Fukushima nuclear power plant. The water had been used to cool the plant's reactors damaged in the 2011 tsunami. Japan now plans to discharge the treated water into the sea in 2023. Neighbouring China and South Korea have objected to the move. 200 protesters remain at the Canadian border, blocking North America's busiest land border crossing the Ambassador Bridge. Demonstrators opposing vaccine mandates have occupied the bridge for 5 days, slowing trade and prompting President Biden to call for an end to the siege. So far, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has rejected calls to use the military. Fully vaccinated British travellers heading to France no longer have to take a coronavirus test before departure. The travel rules have been eased just in time for the half-term holidays, with many holiday makers expected to head to French ski resorts. The move comes after the UK significantly eased its own rules for arriving travellers. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning. If you're joining us, you're watching GB News. This is the political correction. We're here for the next hour to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. This is not just about journalists talking to journalists. It's about you telling us what you think. Coming up in this hour, we will discuss Jacob Rees-Mogg and his new role in government. A state of emergency has been declared in Ontario in response to 2 weeks of COVID protests. And do you agree with Sir John Major? Has trust in politics been eroded by foolish behaviour? Well, this is the political correction, and your views have been pouring in. So, Trevor says about Russia, I find it hard to see what Russia would gain from an invasion of Ukraine. They might win a short war, but what happens after, as we found our cost in Iraq and Afghanistan, it goes on for much longer? Paul.
Julia says, all eyes are on Russia. I doubt whether Putin will invade Ukraine. He's just flexing his muscles.
Alex, who must be a friend of yours, Paul, says Paul accurately gives the best take on this Russian supposed invasion of Ukraine. How are the Western countries so certain of the date of the invasion? And even if there's some truth to it, Russians are not that stupid to go ahead with it as planned. Well done, Paul. You've got a fan out there.
I think he's got a point, Alex. Well said. Carol says it's not Russia that's pushing for a conflict, it's the West by pouring troops and equipment into proximity with Russia. All Russia's troops and equipment are within their own borders and are only there to counteract NATO's expansion and aggression and Ukrainian threats to attack Russians. We must make Ukraine abide by the Minsk peace treaties.
Lee, what views have you got there?
Yeah, continuing on Russia then, Darrell says, I've never been convinced Putin had wanted to invade Ukraine because he would likely lose too much, particularly financially. Depends, I suppose, what you think is Putin's reason for doing this. And if you listen to what he's saying about Greater Russia and wanting to go back to that sort of state, I don't think it's about finance, really. It's about something more than that. And then Philip, he says, can the West afford a fight with Russia after this past 2 years of COVID costs? Good point again.
Well, I detect a certain amount of scepticism amongst GBNews viewers, and Paul said earlier that people may be left with egg on their face. Well, it may come as early as this week. Those who say that it's going to happen may be left with egg on their face, and those who are saying now that it's not going to happen may be left with egg on their face. Moving on, the new Minister of State for Brexit Opportunities and Government Efficiency, Jacob Rees-Mogg, has vowed that Brexit will transform Britain and deliver such dividends that within a decade no one will want to rejoin the European Union. That's in today's Sunday Express. It's been said that Boris Johnson's mini reshuffle earlier this week has been a great one for Eurosceptics, with Brexit stalwart Chris Heaton-Harris promoted to Chief Whip alongside Mr Rees-Mogg, being given his new role guiding Britain's future outside the European Union. Well, Arlene, you may not think that Brexit has been quite the success that you wanted from the Northern Ireland perspective. Are you a bit sceptical about what Mr Rees-Mogg is saying?
Well, of course, the first thing that Jacob could do is to help us trigger Article 16 so that we deal with the Northern Ireland Protocol. That would be a great Brexit opportunity for those of us who live in Northern Ireland. I mean, I voted for Brexit, Michael, because I did believe there were opportunities to be had from leaving the European Union. I'd been the economy minister in Northern Ireland for 7 years. I had seen the way in which the European Union had put a dead hand, if you like, on innovation, on entrepreneurship, the ability for us as a nation to intervene to help companies through state aid rules wasn't allowed. So I believe that there were opportunities to be had from Brexit. I suppose the great sadness for those of us who live in Northern Ireland is the fact that we've been stymied in all of that by the protocol, which of course leaves us in the state aid regime here in Northern Ireland. And actually the fact that when Jacob speaks about Brexit opportunities, he doesn't recognise that he needs to look at the whole of the United Kingdom and not just Great Britain as well.
A trigger warning for viewers. We are now conducting a discussion amongst 3 people who voted for Brexit, which may be pretty unusual. Paul, have you been disappointed at the way the country has exploited its opportunities? Do you have much faith in what Jacob Rees-Mogg is saying about the future?
Well, look, I'm an old-fashioned socialist. I mean, I voted to leave the European Union because I see it effectively as a capitalist club, a club that promotes privatisation and austerity. And I would stand in that tradition, which was once very dominant in the Labour movement, I have to say, that Eurosceptic tradition, which nowadays is very much a fringe position in the Labour movement. But I have absolutely no desire to see Britain become a sort of Singapore on Thames, which I think is the view of Brexit that many people on the right would have. My reasons for voting for Brexit were something fundamentally different. I didn't, by the way, imagine that the Conservative Party was going to deliver my reasons for voting Brexit, but for me it was always a necessary but insufficient step to get in the type of economy that we want to see. And I think being outside of the European Union gives us the ability, for example, to take industries into public ownership, to renationalise the railways in a way that we wouldn't have been able to do inside the European Union, to give state aid to industries, to subsidise manufacturing, all of the sort of things that you would probably oppose, Michael, but you know, as far as I'm concerned, are fundamental to rebalancing the economy in this country and delivering a fairer society.
Yeah, it does show that the coalition that voted for Brexit was a fairly broad one. But I think Jacob Rees-Mogg is he's concentrating on the economy here, and I understand that's what people want to hear about. Because my main reason for voting for Brexit was about political accountability. It was about freedom. Freedom was about democracy. And I think what is being done to Northern Ireland at the moment so absolutely illustrates the point. I mean, Northern Ireland is being bullied by the European Union. We had the Good Friday, the Belfast Agreement, and the protocol that was signed after Brexit stated in terms that it was going to respect that treaty in all its aspects. It clearly does not. It has absolutely upset the unionist community. It has brought about the collapse of the executive. It is bullying by a distant Brussels government that has no sensitivity for what's going on the ground. I can't think of a better demonstration of why we needed the Brexit. Over to you, Arlene.
Yeah, and I mean, as you know, a German official was heard to say that Northern Ireland was the price of Brexit because they wanted to send a very clear signal to other European countries that if you decide to leave the European club, there will be consequences. And unfortunately, for those of us who live in Northern Ireland, we're seeing those consequences played out every day, which is why if Jacob wants to send a very clear message about Brexit opportunities, then we must re-establish the single market of the United Kingdom, because it's there in the Act of Union that parts of the Act of Union of the Union will be able to trade freely between each other, and of course that's not happening in Northern Ireland at this present moment in time. So therefore, absolutely, Jacob wants to look for Brexit opportunities. The first Brexit opportunity is the triggering of Article 16.
Paul, reaction to that?
I tend to agree. I mean, you know, the protocol clearly isn't working. The Article 16 is there to allow for it to be invoked where there are societal or economic or environmental difficulties. My understanding is that there are more checks on goods coming into Northern Ireland than there are across the whole of the eastern frontier of the European Union, which suggests there's something political going on as well. I think we made an error from the outset of the negotiations by not effectively saying to the European Union that in terms of a hard border, that's really your problem. We'll cooperate on it, but you're the ones who want to protect the single market inside your territory. So really the ball is in your court. I think by taking ownership of the problem, we've put ourselves on a hook really, and have found it in the years since very difficult to get off of that hook.
But having taken ownership of it, I do think the British government is making some very sensible proposals now. For example, saying that there should be a red and a green channel. So a red channel is for goods that are going through Northern Ireland from Great Britain on their way to the Republic of Ireland, which is in the European Union, and a green channel for goods which are going to stay inside Northern Ireland. And there are many examples of such goods because a lot of these things are coming over from Great Britain and they're headed for trusted supermarkets in Northern Ireland. I mean, it really seems to me the most eminently solvable problem if there were to be goodwill. And if there isn't goodwill, then I suspect it's for the reason given by that German official, quoted just now by Arlene. It's some sort of punishment for Brexit. Moving on. This week, Sir John Major attacked Boris Johnson and his government for their conduct during COVID lockdowns and their handling of the so-called Partygate. The former Conservative Prime Minister said that trust in politics is at a low ebb eroded by foolish behaviour, adding that outright lies breed contempt. Well, I served in John Major's cabinet, of course, so I know John Major reasonably well. Let's first of all, though, turn to people who may know him slightly less well. Paul, what was your reaction to John Major making these remarks?
Well, I had to stifle a laugh, actually, because Sir John Major gave a speech under the banner of "In Democracy We Trust," and his speech was peppered with references to how we must respect democracy and how the current government are undermining democracy. Now, I've got no love for the current government, but the idea that Sir John Major, who, let us not forget, was somebody who fought consistently to overturn the result of a referendum in which 33 million people voted. He wanted us to go and do it again because it didn't deliver the result that he wanted. The idea that this man is now some kind of champion of democracy, imploring the rest of us to respect it and undermine it, not undermine it, I think is laughable. And I think what it actually shows again is that there is a section of our elites in Britain who simply have not reconciled themselves to the fact that millions of people voted to leave the European Union. They weren't expecting it. They hadn't had a vote go against them for many years. And when it happened, they just regarded it as automatically illegitimate and thought we have to do it again. They saw it as some sort of aberration. So look, yes, we criticise the government. We hold them to account for their very clear double standards. They're guilty of that. But let's not pretend that John Major is really being motivated by the desire to uphold democracy here.
And remember, he didn't just call for a second referendum. He took the British government to court. The most extraordinary scene of a former Conservative Prime Minister taking a present Conservative Prime Minister to court. Arlene, are you going to be any kinder to Sir John this morning?
I'm afraid not. The man has absolutely zero self-awareness. We all remember in 2019 when he attacked the Prime Minister for proroguing Parliament. And actually, as you say, took a court case. But of course, he prorogued Parliament back in 2007 during the Cash for Questions. You will remember that very well. And yet had no self-awareness about the fact that he did that. He came to Northern Ireland before the referendum in 2016, at the beginning of June, I think it was, to Londonderry, of course, on the border with the Republic of Ireland, along with Tony Blair. So the Tony and John show came to tell us how to vote in the referendum. I said at the time, I was First Minister of Northern Ireland at the time, that I thought it was rather sad that he was coming over to tell us how to vote, as if we didn't know our own mind as to what was going to happen. So he has intervened on many occasions. He has no self-awareness. And actually, I would say he probably pushed people to vote for Brexit, given that he came and made that intervention back in 2016.
So you have, after all, said something in favour of Sir John Major, that he increased the Brexit vote, and it was pretty close run, so perhaps we have more to thank him for than we thought. But let me just add that when he was Prime Minister, he was extremely upset at any criticism that might be made by his predecessor, Margaret Thatcher, and I must admit that she was so ungracious on occasion as to attack him, and he had my sympathy as the Conservative Prime Minister being attacked by his predecessor. But I think she never quite attacked in the way that he has on this occasion. I mean, one perfectly understands that if you're cornered in a studio and you're asked about the behaviour of the present Prime Minister, and let's face it, it's been pretty difficult to defend, that you raise an eyebrow or you come up with a wry smile or you let it be known that you're a bit shocked by what has gone on. But of course, what happened in this case was it was a speech. I mean, the attack on his successor had been very carefully crafted. And I do have a feeling, Paul, that you're right. I mean, we can all be pretty shocked by Boris Johnson's behaviour, but I suspect that what's absolutely at the heart of it is Brexit. And what is the greatest sin that Boris has committed from the point of view of Sir John Major? It is that he succeeded in taking Britain out of the European Union. And for some people, that really is an unforgivable crime, and it justifies attacking them again and again. But maybe, Arlene, if he was so effective in Northern Ireland, as you say, maybe his intervention will have shored up some support for Boris Johnson, and Boris, after all,
I think that's
will be
right.
fairly grateful.
I absolutely think that's right. I think Downing Street probably celebrates with maybe a bottle of champagne every time that he appears in the media.
We've not had enough champagne in Downing Street yet, so another bottle is welcome. Coming up after the break, we'll be talking about the Northern Ireland Protocol with Arlene. But first, here's the weather.
Well, the UK is looking very unsettled as heavy, persistent rain and strong winds spread across the country. And these are the details for you. In the southwest, a very wet morning and the rain will continue through to lunchtime. Drier weather waiting out in the west will arrive later on in the day. For London and the southeast, cloudy as we head towards midday, but it should be mostly dry before turning unsettled this afternoon. Across Wales, a very wet and windy picture of heavy rain, heaviest over the hills and mountains and gales and exposed areas. The rain will break up through the afternoon. In the Midlands, about lunchtime, the rain turns heaviest and most persistent. The winds will strengthen too, making conditions difficult if you're heading out on the road. After a very wet and windy morning, northeastern England should become drier. Some breaks about midday, though there'll still be plenty of rain around and the wind staying strong for a while. Heavy rain pushing across the southern half of Scotland as we head towards lunchtime. Further north, it's going to be drier, sunnier and calmer, albeit with a few showers. Now, after a very wet start in Northern Ireland, the rain will be starting to ease by the afternoon. It's going to take a while to clear completely, and some rain will linger. So the worst of the unsettled weather will clear away by tonight, with clearer skies in the west.
GBNews is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis, and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here. Joe Biden walking out. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties. But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it. Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. Your GB views have been pouring in, and Michael says, I heard mention of NATO being a defensive organisation and nearly choked on my breakfast. Was it not NATO that interfered in the fractured Yugoslavia, a country that was no part of NATO? That is absolutely true, and I was Defence Secretary at the time, and I would argue that it was the most successful operation that has saved tens of thousands of lives, and I don't believe that anybody has been killed in military action in the former Yugoslavia since that very effective NATO intervention. Thank you for your comment, Michael.
And Robert says also on Russia, having lived in Ukraine, the Ukrainian people want their own country and not being controlled from Moscow, and they are willing to fight for their independence.
And on the question of Sir John Major, someone called John says, I lost trust in politicians in general when John Major did his best to overturn the Brexit referendum result, a point on which you were very, very strong, Paul.
And on China, Lynn says, having voted Conservative all my life, if trading with China continues, I'm afraid my vote will either go elsewhere or I will not vote at all. Boris will make a grave mistake and it will be dangerous for Britain in years to come. I never buy Chinese if I have a choice.
And I was sorry that we didn't have time to ask Sir Ian Duncan-Smith whether he thought that Boris's position on China would increase the danger of a challenge that he's facing from his backbenchers. Well, now, a resolution to the problems with the Northern Ireland Protocol, which we mentioned earlier, is unlikely to be reached before the Stormont Assembly elections in May. That's according to the DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. The row is over the protocol disrupting business in Northern Ireland. Now, here is our Northern Ireland correspondent, Dougie Beattie, with more.
Politics, passion, prices and the protocol. And don't forget the pandemic. The EU's influence knows no bounds. The price of flowers has risen and the paperwork around imports has meant goods now head to the Republic before travelling north. Beth Lunny has ran Saintfield nurseries for years and found with the protocol her former suppliers are now taking a different route.
We would start maybe taking their first load of roses before Christmas. What has happened now is we're not allowed to bring them over. But it turned out I was speaking to one of the lorry drivers who was delivering stuff to me from Holland, and I was asking him how things were going. And he told me that he'd taken a full load of bare root roses down to the Republic of Ireland, who had taken them via one of the Dublin ports from England. So they were able to go in there. We're not allowed to buy them. They were able to go in there. So they went in via from England to the Republic. They went to a nursery in Kildare. They were potted up, and then we had to buy them that way from there. We weren't able to get roses anywhere else.
Tracy Burrows owns Floral Creations and is facing similar problems and finds it all so very frustrating.
Since even the word Brexit was even mentioned, prices have just increased, like beyond what we could ever have foreseen. You know, like sometime one week you could go in and buy, you know, a bunch of something from the wholesalers and it's one price, and then like 2 days later you could go in and there could be a 60% difference in the prices. Obviously, whenever it comes to peak seasons as well, it's not the florists making all the money. Prices have just jumped so much, and we have no control over that, and it's just soul destroying whenever you're buying your flowers from the suppliers.
In the words of Brian Ferry, what is the price of love, and will we still be expecting roses on Valentine's Day?
He never did, so I'm not expecting them. Okay.
I don't know. I think I might, for I love her so much.
No, I would die of shock. I think he'd been up to something if he came over with roses.
Definitely. I'm worth more than money.
I knew I'd find an advantage to the protocol somewhere. Saving money, plastic flowers. Who ever said romance was dead? Dougie Beattie, GB News, County Down.
Well, that was a little St. Valentine's package, but it does illustrate what's going on in Northern Ireland. And I think, Arlene, a lot of people would find understanding the technicalities here quite difficult. But that little package from Dougie Beattie may have helped them to understand the practical results.
Well, it's about trade diversion, and Paul rightly pointed out that Article 16 can be triggered for environmental, economic or societal damage to Northern Ireland. One of the other issues is around trade diversion, and there has been a huge trade diversion because of the protocol. In other words, people, instead of sourcing their goods from Great Britain, and of course, because we're part of the United Kingdom, there's a very integrated supply system there for our small businesses. They're now having to source those goods from the single European market, in other words, from the Republic of Ireland. So you have the bizarre situation where Great Britain suppliers are sending goods into Dublin, into Kildare, and then people from Northern Ireland are going to the Republic to source their roses. I mean, it is completely mad and totally disproportionate to the avowed intent of protecting the single European market, because, of course, the regulations in Great Britain are exactly the same as the regulations in the European Union at this present moment in time. So there's absolutely no risk to the European single market, but yet we have this barrier between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and that's what really needs to be sorted out.
I said earlier that it seemed to me there was an absolutely commonsensical solution to this problem, and I believe at least part of it is already on the table, put there by the British. So why do you think, Arlene, that we need to trigger Article 16? Why should we not keep talking if there is a common sense solution?
Well, there's been a common sense solution even before the protocol was born, Michael, but unfortunately the European Union didn't accept some of those proposals that were put forward, whether it was trusted traders, which you've already mentioned, in other words, the large supermarkets being able to deal with all of these processes in-house to protect the single European market, small business exemptions for those small businesses that wanted to trade, continue to get supplies from Great Britain, using risk, using technology. We could have dealt with all of these issues without the need for this border being implemented between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But the political will was not there. And I think the political will is still not there. And that's the unfortunate thing, because we've been talking about this now for over a year. You say, why not keep talking? Well, in July of last year, the command paper from the government, our government, indicated that the circumstances were there to implement Article 16, but they were going to try and find an agreed solution. We're now over 6 months down the road and we still haven't found an agreed solution. And all the while, costs continue to rise for people in Northern Ireland. I understand haulage costs are up by 27%. and our choice is being reduced because some companies are simply not supplying into Northern Ireland now because the administration is too much of a burden for their company and the costs have risen. So therefore, why should they bother?
And just to emphasise what Arlene has said there, that there's been no change in regulations on the British side. So red roses are no more threatening to the European Union now than they were when we were in the European Union. After the break, it will be time for Common Ground as we focus on the issues that bring the UK and its people together. But first, the latest headlines.
It's 11:33. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Defence Secretary says he fears a Russian attack on Ukraine is highly likely. Speaking to the Sunday Times, Ben Wallace said there's a whiff of Munich in the air, referring to diplomatic efforts which failed to prevent the Second World War. The Labour Party is urging the government to learn lessons from the Afghanistan evacuation to help people leave Ukraine if Russia invades. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy is calling for phone lines to be staffed 24/7 and extra resources put in place to process visas. He's also written to the Foreign Secretary saying the Labour Party stands united with the government over Russian aggression. The Prime Minister will leave London this week, insisting he's getting on with the job despite a police investigation into alleged lockdown breaches. Number 10 says he'll start the week in Scotland at a manufacturing site before heading to an oncology centre in northwest England. Lord Frost is among a group of senior Tory MPs and peers urging Boris Johnson to reverse the government's ban on fracking as the UK faces an energy crisis. In a joint letter to the Prime Minister, the former Cabinet Minister and around 29 other Conservatives said it would lead to a British energy renaissance. The shale gas mining ban came into effect in 2019 after attempts caused 2 minor earthquakes in Lancashire. The Mayor of London says he'll oppose the appointment of a new Metropolitan Police Chief unless they have a robust plan to deal with cultural problems in the force. Writing in The Observer, Sadiq Khan said he was deeply concerned that public trust in the country's biggest police force had been shattered by a series of scandals. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere, the political correction will be back in a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. Sunday is a special day for Christians, but we acknowledge that faith comes in all shapes and sizes. Each week on the Political Correction, we aim to talk to someone at the heart of his or her community to talk about what brings us together. In other words, our common ground. As we all know, Sunday mornings can be a rather busy time for those within religious communities. So yesterday, Arlene Foster spoke with Fergus Butler Galley, an Anglican clergyman and author, and here's what he had to say.
Welcome, Fergus, and thank you for joining me this afternoon. I know that there's 3 issues that you wanted to cover in our short term together, but what's your first issue about?
Absolutely. Well, it's very nice to be with you and be speaking with you now. Well, first, I think what we've seen, all the news in the past, well, it seems an awfully long time, but certainly the past couple of weeks, I think there is a real, an issue of crisis of trust in our institutions. And we've seen it this week with the Metropolitan Police. I know that's a story that is leading across news channels. That has been a long burning, a long boiling story. There is a serious crisis of trust, I think, in terms of revelations around the COVID rules, et cetera, and how the government itself was behaving. And I think, actually, whilst these are related to very specific scandals and specific failures of standards by those people in power, I think there's something, it says something that is indicative, to my mind, of a real problem that we have in this country, arguably across the West, or indeed across the world, with a sort of crisis of faith in institutions. And in some ways that is hugely deserved. You know, you look at institutions, be that the Metropolitan Police, be that Parliament, be that the Church of England, or any of the churches, really. And there is an increasing failure, I think, to address serious problems. And that is fundamentally why Cressida Dick, or the stated reason why Cressida Dick has gone, is there is no longer confidence in her to deliver the changes needed to the Metropolitan Police. But in many of these institutions, I think there is a serious lack of accountability. And then there's an awful lot of marking our own homework, of internal investigations. I don't think anyone really expected the Gray Report to be, to lead to anything. I think that was probably a mistake if they did, because and I think when you speak to ordinary people, I think there is a weariness and an expectation, actually, that institutions will do wrong, and will simply cover their own tracks. There's often affection for the individual. You speak to individual people, they say, well, actually, my individual MP is working very hard for me. My local parish priest is working very hard for me. My local doctor is working very hard for me. But there is just such a gulf between the institutions that people like me represent and the actual people we're meant to serve.
And I noticed that one of the issues that have been raised, if we take the Metropolitan Police as an example of one of those institutions, is that Cressida Dick is being accused of being far too defensive of her organisation when charges were laid. And my goodness, there's been a number of issues that have been laid before the Metropolitan Police recently. I mean, I suppose on one hand, people say, actually, she was standing up for her rank and file officers, but to other people looking into the institution, she's been defensive. And that's the tension, isn't it, Fergus, in relation to institutions? It's standing up for the institution, or are you actually not allowing the accountability to come in?
Absolutely. And I think at the root of all this, there's a question of confidence, because I think an institution that has a healthy level of confidence in itself can take criticism, can say, you know what, we're doing things wrong, and we are confident enough in the good things that we're doing to try and address those things where we're doing wrong. We are confident enough in these aspects of local policing to try and address racism, to try and address the issues around the Sarah Everard case and the sort of tragedy that unfolded from that. But if an institution is not confident enough, it becomes defensive. And we see this in the Church of England all the time, across churches, where there's sort of a siege mentality. And so when valid criticism comes up, there isn't a sense. And I think if you love an institution, and I do, the Church of England drives me mad, but I love it and I believe in what it does. But if you love it, you actually want it to do better and be better. And I think we do no favours by defensiveness, because are you in the long term serving those rank and file people better by saying, look, there are things we need to talk about, things we need to engage with, things we need to address? Or are you simply saying, actually, no, I'm going to be super defensive, I'm going to put the sort of screens up, or at the very best, I'm going to investigate it myself? And I think it comes to chronic problem in modern life is a lack of conversation and a lack of people talking. I know the title of this slot is Common Ground, and you will have people from across political and religious spectrums, and if we are not talking and engaging, then we are not going to address these things. And then when an institution says we're not talking, this is our business, not yours,
yes,
it doesn't do any favours to anybody, really.
Yes, indeed, and we've seen that in Northern Ireland, where we had the horrific issues around child abuse, the historic child abuse, where initially there was a lot of defensiveness.
Exactly.
But looking wider, then, Fergus, your second issue that you wanted to talk about today was the issue of the persecution of Christians across the world.
Absolutely, and it is something that is endemic, and I know the Bishop of Truro is advising the government. Fiona Bruce MP is one of the champions, and they are doing sterling work. But it strikes me as just completely mind-boggling how this isn't higher up, people's register. And I think there is a real problem again in, we associate Christianity with being, the established religion of this country, with being, comfortable, perhaps declining, but that's its own problem. And in truth, Christianity is the most important global force shaping it. It is the largest religion on the face of this planet. It comes in every shade, it comes in every color, it comes from every single country. And so for us to sort of, to my mind, for any government that has a commitment to human rights, that has a commitment saying, there are protected characteristics, et cetera, any that believes in freedom of belief, to be quite so sort of, and I have to say Britain is probably doing better on this than many other countries, but to be quite so blasé and quite so cynical, I think, about the plight of people, across the Middle East, the plight of people in places like northern Nigeria, parts of Africa where massacres are just completely everyday, occurrences, and of course in China, where alongside the appalling genocide of the Uyghur Muslims and the suppression of belief across society there, you have persecution of Christians as well, and I think really, the world is, the Archbishop of Canterbury has a quote he likes to point out, that the demographic nature of the world means even the average Anglican is a woman in her 20s in sub-Saharan Africa. And so the demographic future of the world is more and not less religious. And I think the West will be judged retrospectively for failing, and particularly those of us who are Western Christians. I don't say this as a kind of stick to bash others with. It's partly a mea culpa, something I pray about, but what more can I do to support those, my brothers and sisters? And I think it's something that the future generations will look back on our failure to protect people of faith, more generally across the world, as a real failing of the West's dying days, really.
Yeah. And of course, we hear quite a bit about the Uyghur Muslims in China because of what's going on there. But you're right, we don't hear very much about what's happening to Christian communities having to worship underground and what have you. And actually, I was reading Open Doors recently, and they were saying in a publication that Afghanistan now is the #1 area for the persecution of Christians. And again, that brings you back to what happened with the withdrawal of troops in August.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we have to take a degree of moral responsibility for that. And it links in some ways to our what we were talking about with institutions. We can be defensive about it, or we can try and explain it away through realpolitik. But actually, at some point, there has to be an honest thing saying that we failed, and what can we now do to try and make that better?
Indeed, and the last issue is a very localised issue for us in the UK, and that's around the cost of living. And you've been travelling about the UK and noting how it's impacting on various communities across the UK.
Absolutely, I've been in in the last couple of months or so, since it became clear that this was coming, since winter set in. I've been in Burnley, I've been in Bradford, I've been in Liverpool, I've been in Kent, I've been in London. I've been visiting, churches and community groups, and there is a real fear out there about what this cost of living is going to do. And it may seem like the micro dictating the macro, in that if I would say to you, well, a book group hosted in a church in AN town somewhere in the Midlands is going to shut down because it cannot afford the heating, and because people in the book group no longer can afford the extra, cost per month of membership. That could be a matter of 2 or 3 people, but then another community asset collapses. And that community asset is helping keep this church going. That church is helping keep people warm, helping them, giving them, frankly, in the crisis we're really facing, which I think is around hope and around mental health, giving people a space. If that church then closes, so these little increments, which people may say, oh well, it's just individual heating bills. It isn't at all, and we are suffering a real crisis in terms of what the sort of Cameron government wanted to call the kind of little platoons, but the absolute building blocks of conversation, of the interpersonal on a small scale, in villages, in towns, in specific postcodes in cities. And the cost of living crisis is going to squeeze that even more, just as swingeing cuts will happen to government budgets, just as if anything, the churches and people of faith are needed more than any other time to create those building blocks, to create those spaces where communities can come together, can learn from one another, can engage with one another. And if it's a case of not being able to heat the hall, as I've heard from in some of my travels, it's a case of no longer having enough volunteers because people can't give up the time because they're having to take extra jobs. We are going to face a societal crisis, really.
And of course, Ferguson, and we'll end on this, but this comes off the back of being isolated because of COVID. And then if people can't get out to their little community groups as well, that's going to continue that isolation. And as you say, lead to all sorts of societal issues, but also mental health issues and health issues for the individual as well.
And particularly people in vulnerable and marginalised groups, people who often are not considered to be part of, the wider, they're not necessarily economically useful. They might be older, isolated people, et cetera, and they are going to be the ones who suffer. And I would say, as a final note, I've done a number of funerals over the COVID period, done people who very tragically died of COVID. I think I've probably done as many funerals of older people who have simply given up on life because those community, instruction, those community groups, those community engagement, those moments where for them it might be once a week, it might be the only time that they had contact, and removing that kills people quite literally. And so I think when we have an eye on the cost of living crisis, when we have an eye, and of course there's a million different factors here, whether it's green stuff or whether it's public finances, just a final plea that some of those things that might seem unimportant, they might seem little, they might seem local, are actually quite literally keeping people going.
Well, Fergus, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you.
I look forward to speaking to you again in the future on our slot of Common Ground.
Lovely to speak to you. Thank you very much.
A state of emergency has been declared in the province of Ontario. Border traffic at the Ambassador Bridge, which links Windsor to Detroit, has been shut down since Monday as part of a nationwide protest against pandemic restrictions. Joining us now to discuss the ongoing situation is Canadian political journalist John Iveson. Hello, John. Well, we've seen some of the scenes over here, but it's harder, I think, for us to understand how Canadian public opinion sits on this matter. Are the protesters getting favour with the public? Is the Prime Minister being strongly backed?
It is complicated. I mean, I think people around the world find it somewhat almost amusing that polite Canadians are protesting and blockading, but it's not that funny. I mean, if you live in Ottawa right now, the city has essentially been rendered inoperable. Shops, restaurants, offices all closed down. And public opinion is a little bit split in that there is sympathy with the protests. There is great frustration with the way that this federal government has handled things and the way the provinces have handled things, because a lot of the lockdown responsibilities were devolved to provinces. But at the same time, they do not approve of the tactics. I think 2/3 of Canadians in one poll said they opposed the truckers' convoy. I think somewhere around 44% said that they had some sympathies with the cause that they were protesting.
What was the particular thing about the COVID restrictions that prompted this protest? Give us an idea of the regulations that apply both federally and at province level.
Well, Canada has been more restrictive than the UK. I was back in the UK last week, and I think you're probably about a month ahead of us as far as relaxing things. For example, coming back through into Montreal, I had to get a PCR test to get into the country, and then I had to take another PCR test on landing, the results of which are not in, and during that time I'm meant to be quarantining. And I think that those kind of overly restrictive restrictions have upset a lot of people. And the particular last straw in this case was an imposition on truckers that they, crossing the border, now for 2 years, truckers coming into Canada from the US did not require to be vaccinated. So quite why they now need to be vaccinated is not clear to me. But this has been a political wedge from the Trudeau Liberal government, which went through a general election last September, very, very heavily wedging the Conservative Party on vaccine mandates. And instead of loosening restrictions, as many of the provinces are doing, the federal government is actually still tightening them and is going to impose further restrictions on truckers travelling interprovincially. So, I think people have just reached their limit, and which explains why there is such sympathy for the truckers' convoy, even though people do not like the way it's being done, particularly when it starts to impact the flow of goods across the border. I mean, that bridge in Windsor, it's $400 million worth of goods flowing back and forward every day. There are car plants on this side of the border, car plants obviously in the US. Any particular car has components that have crossed that border 9 times.
John Iveson, thank you very much, and good luck to you Canadians, because as you say, it's a serious matter and a lot of people are suffering. Well, it is Valentine's Day tomorrow. Arlene, if you could give a rose to any politician, to whom might it be, do you think?
Oh my goodness, who would I give a rose to today? I would give a rose to Jacob Rees-Mogg and invite him to come to Northern Ireland with some roses and would show him how the border prevented him from bringing those roses across to Northern Ireland. So Jacob Rees-Mogg would get a rose from me. That
was a spontaneous answer and a jolly good one. I've had time to think about it, and I thought maybe I'd send a Valentine to Angela Merkel, because I think she's being missed at the moment in the West's response to the Ukrainian situation. Paul?
Well, being the only non-politician here, I wouldn't send a Valentine to any politician, I have to say. I think too many of them are a bit filled with their own self-importance anyway and probably don't need any more flattery from members of the public. Not only that, but I have to say it's likely that my wife is possibly watching, and I daren't suggest sending a Valentine to anyone else if that's the case, because she won't let me in the door when I get home.
Arlene, what will be the biggest story of the coming week? I'm going to say Ukraine, whether it happens or whether it doesn't, it will be the biggest story of the week. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Ukraine, Russia, particularly if we have some people actually predicting what day it could be turned into a Sue Gray type of, is it coming today or is it coming tomorrow situation. But yeah, I think Ukraine, Russia is going to be the story of the week.
Paul?
Yeah, it will be Ukraine. And I just hope that those who have made those cast iron predictions of an invasion, which may happen, and you can't rule it out, but if it doesn't happen, given the hyperbole, I hope they show a bit of humility. We'll see.
Well, thank you so much for watching The Political Correction today. Coming up soon is Alistair Stewart. But having watched The Political Correction, we're now going to take you over to find out what the weather is going to be like. I don't mean the political weather, I mean actually the meteorological weather.
Well, the UK is looking very unsettled as heavy, persistent rain and strong winds spread across the country. And these are the details for you. In the southwest, a very wet morning and the rain will continue through to lunchtime. Drier weather waiting out in the west will arrive later on in the day. For London and the southeast, cloudy as we head towards midday, but it should be mostly dry before turning unsettled this afternoon. Across Wales, a very wet and windy picture of heavy rain, heaviest over the hills and mountains